But then he sees behind him that his master is dead and decides to blow up like a balloon and pop. Everybody's kung fu fighting and they're fast as lightning, because this week we're doing Big Trouble in Little China, starring Kurt Russell, Kim Cattrall and Dennis Dun. So Kurt Russell was actually worried about starring in this film. He was having a lot of self-doubt because he'd starred in a couple of flops in a row, but John Carpenter didn't give a fuck. Obviously worked with him a bunch of times before, and at the end of the day, it's Kurt fucking Russell, so who would not want him in their film? But unfortunately, this film was a flop. It was one of John Carpenter's many bombs at the box office, and to be honest, anytime he actually tried to get a budget together, he would bomb. The Thing was a massive bomb, despite eventually becoming a massive cult classic. And it's the same case with this film. Once again, John Carpenter was punished for being ahead of his time. That sort of mixing of different cultures, making a comic book-esque film grounded in a real action film sort of setting. Self-aware, cheesy one-liners and sort of a parody of classic action films and Asian culture. Whether it was that or it was bad marketing, I don't know, but it's just such a shame that any time he got any real serious money to work with and really let his imagination run wild, it would just fucking blow at the box office. Eventually, Carpenter would have to go back to working with his couple of $1 million budgets where he would get complete creative control, and those films usually would always make really good money.
The production on this was actually rushed through because there was a similar film coming out starring Eddie Murphy. The film was very similar and they rushed to get this out simply because John Carpenter thought it's got fucking Eddie Murphy in it, and at that time anything that Eddie Murphy was in was just a hit. Well, it didn't turn out that way. Both of these films at the time of release were panned by critics. Big Trouble in Little China, on reflection, is now seen as a much better film than Gold Rush.
What did you see any the gist of what critics were panning it for?
I think a lot of them didn't like the level of cheese in it, and there was an extortion amount of cheese, but I for one enjoyed it. But you could really say, Declan, that it might turn a lot of people off because sometimes it was quite sickly.
May the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
But for me, this film is everything you'd want in a film. A great title that 100% sums up the kind of film you're going to get. Kurt Russell, John Carpenter, an 80s cheesy synthy soundtrack, specially made 80s pop song, comic book style, corny, magical fight scenes. So the film's like a perfect combination of Asian folklore and Western fairy tales. Woven into the plot, you've got elements of Sleeping Beauty, you've got elements of Alice in Wonderland, which a character literally points out at one point, but you've also got a really nice battle between Asian ideals and American ideals going on. Wang is always coming out with these Asian classical Chinese proverbs, and it's always answered with American straight shooting logic.
Here, let me hold that.
A brave man likes the feel of nature on his fist, Jack.
Yeah, and a wise man has enough sense of getting out of the rain.
But what I liked about this is you essentially have two heroes. And I think John Carpenter tried to do that because they actually changed the opening scene. Because John Carpenter wanted David Dunn's character to also be a hero to the audience.
Kurt Russell's character was originally a lot more toned down, but the studio definitely wanted that character beefed up and to put it more as the central figure. But John Carpenter, more or less, the way he saw it, Wang is the main character in this. Kurt Russell, throughout it, kind of is a bumbling idiot, tends to fuck things up. The things he does is very sidekick role type things. He doesn't beat everyone up in the fight scenes. He might take out one or two people. At one point, I think he even knocks himself out accidentally.
No way.
But I needed to really go back and remember that. Kurt Russell is such a leading man kind of guy that even when he's doing those things, he was still the main character for me. And as much as I love Wang as a character, he's still the sidekick, or at the very least, they're just on an even kill. And I'm fine with that. I like them as the two battling leads. And it actually added a lot to it, I think.
I want to go back and talk about the opening scene because the lawyer is like, oh, they're talking about all this magic, and then he's like, I can assure you it's real. And he's like, how do you know? And then we have that great bit where he makes the lightning between his hands, and I was like, What a setup. This is going to be a fucking ride, man. What I just thought it was a great opening scene.
It's brilliant. Then you get a big synthy 80s soundtrack kick in. You got Kurt Russell driving in his truck. He's chatting absolute gibberish into his CB radio.
You remember what old Jack Burton always says at a time like that. Have you paid your dues, Jack? Yes, sir, the check is in the mail.
His trucker name's Pork Chop, isn't it? It's like, hey, this is Pork Chop. And I was like, what a classic. Like, you could have thought of something better for Kurt Russell. Like,
He's kind of perfect.
yeah.
And he drives into town, drives straight to Chinatown, and immediately starts gambling with these bunch of Asians in an alleyway. And he meets up with his old friend Wang.
What it set up was their dynamic quite quickly. Like, they're friends, obviously, but they seem to have competitive streak between them, and you owe me money and all this, and you know, double or quit. And it kind of set up their friendship really nicely.
It's now morning. Wang's trying to leave, but Kurt Russell wants his money. And he's making up excuses like, oh, I don't have it here, I'll give it to you next time. And he's like, oh, I got it back at a restaurant at home. And he's like, no, I'm coming with you. I don't trust you. And we're going in my truck. You know it's a good adventure film when it feels like an adventure film before they're even started doing adventure shit yet. Because they're not into anything mystical. They haven't run into any trouble or any bad guys or anything to do with the plot. But it's got that sort of fun feel where anything can happen. So they get to the airport. This is where we meet Kim Cattrall's character, Gracie Law, for the first time. I love Kim Cattrall. Like, she's not a good actress, but there's just something likeable about her.
Some actors are dramatically trained and skilled. This British actor's from the school of Shakespeare or Shakespearean. She's never going to be that, but what she does have in abundance is screen presence.
Don't panic, it's only me, Gracie Law.
I don't think I've ever seen her that young. Kurt Russell scanning the crowd. He's obviously thinks he's the greatest ladies man in the world. Being the blonde and like, who's that?
And she's like, no nonsense, doesn't want anything to do with him and he's like this gruff trucker. And then in the midst of that, Asian gangsters kidnap Wang's fiance. Kurt Russell and Wang obviously get into the truck to try and chase him. So they head down to Chinatown, and this is our first sight of Chinatown. Kurt Russell's character makes sense just as a device for the audience because Wang is well aware of all the supernatural stuff that we're gonna see, but Kurt Russell has no clue about it, so he kind of serves as that empathetic device for the audience. He's a person to ask our questions because it's not long before we start to see some crazy Asian shit go down.
They turn around the fucking corner in a truck, and then all of a sudden it's a funeral, and they're like dancing like that meme with the guys, like, the guys holding the coffee, you know, the Nigerian guy, and you're like, what the fuck is going on?
You have the two gangs come out. I didn't like this action scene at first. When they're shooting guns, that portion of it, all the shots are really tightly framed. There's no sense of what's actually happening. Close up of this guy shooting. Close up of this guy shooting on the other side. Once it gets into them all going hand-to-hand combat, you can actually see what's going on. You get a sense of how many people are fighting and where they are positioned to each other. There's some nice arm breaks and practical effects. There's people getting thrown through sugar glass windows, panes, and all sorts.
For the first kind of action scene, I thought it was pretty good. You know, the arm breaks, the way it sets up warring factions, great.
Well, it just immediately sets that tone of this little universe you're going into where there's all these fantastical things happening in Chinatown on seemingly a daily basis. But then we see three mystical figures show up: lightning, rain, and thunder. One arrives out of the sewers in a puff of smoke. I guess he's, what is he, thunder? Is he rain? I don't know what he was. One arrives in a lightning bolt. It's 100% Mortal Kombat. I think this is nearly the best version of Raiden without actually being Raiden.
They're dressed in like the Ronin. I like that, the little straw hats. I really did like the get up.
It doesn't seem that uncommon for people to fuck with the supernatural. Like the tour guide, he's a good character, but he also seems to fuck with supernatural, magical shit. But he's not a wizard as such. He's just kind of like the old guy that knows how to do it.
There's always two opposites, yin and yang, and there's always bad, but there's always a good to balance out the universe.
Lightning, thunder, and rain start causing havoc and beating the shit out of everyone. And then the big evil boss man shows up. He sometimes is in a wheelchair, looks like an old man. Sometimes he appears in that classical Chinese makeup and armory warlike getup. I got the vibe that whenever he's channeling this demon, he can appear like this at certain times, and that's also how he's commanding lightning, thunder, and rain. Or I don't know, is it that, or is it that is another form? Is it he like astral projecting when he's doing that?
From what I could work out of it, it's all one in the same. I don't know what the limits to his power is. Maybe he can only do it a certain amount of... See, the film never explains this.
And it doesn't need to be fair. I'm not picking at it. I'm just kind of like curious and thinking about it.
We've seen already that there's fucking thunder, wind and rain shooting lightning at each other, so you're not going to be like, this is unrealistic.
Kurt Russell in his truck freaks out and just drives straight over him. So he gets out of the truck and the guy's just perfectly fine, like getting up from the other side. And they're like, fuck this. So he has to abandon his truck. And that starts off my favourite thing about Kurt Russell's character throughout the whole film. All he cares about is getting his truck back. And he doesn't see his truck for the rest of the film. Pretty much every 2 minutes, he's either complaining about his truck.
Flying in and out, that was not real. I want to talk to the cops. I want my truck back now. Where the hell am I? My truck! Forget it!
And that was your abandoned truck.
Abandoned like hell.
You'll see him in the background on the phone to the insurance company. If you were breaking this down in a film writing class and you were like, what's his motivation in this story? It's getting his truck.
Kind of like Planes, Trains and Automobiles, so like Steve Martin's character's like, I just want to get home. He just wants his truck.
Speaking of which, Kurt Russell's character has so many great lines in this film.
You people sit tight, hold the fort, and keep the home fires burning. And if we're not back by dawn, call the president. We really shook the pillars of heaven, didn't we, Wang?
We all got the impression that Kurt Russell's Jack Burton's a bullshit, yeah? Later on, he shoots someone and kills him. And the other Chinese bloke goes, is that the first time you've whacked someone? And he's like, no, I've done this loads of times.
They meet up with Kim Cattrall's character, a lawyer who helps women that are arriving into the country and stops them from being trafficked. There's also Margot, the ditzy local reporter who's now in way over her head. She probably thought she was like doing a story about food poisoning in Chinese restaurants. Now she's stuck into this crazy magical conspiracy. And they decide they need to rescue Wang's fiance. But we learn also she hasn't been kidnapped just to be trafficked. We keep hearing about she has green eyes. She's this Chinese girl with green eyes. You never see a Chinese girl with green eyes. It's so rare. Lo Pan's big ceremony of how he's going to summon this demon and channel it and all this shit. A key element of it is a girl with green eyes.
In order to be whole again, he had to find this certain girl of his prophecy and marry her to appease the god of the East. But to appease the emperor, he had to kill her. Kill her.
So the stakes have just been raised again.
Kurt Russell, hero that he is, straight away says, I'll go in, and they'll say, no, you can't go in. You need to go in like you don't know anything. Go in like a businessman looking for a fuck. So he dresses up as like, kind of reminded me of, before Indiana Jones becomes Indiana Jones and he's the professor and he's just in the classes before. I was looking at all the girls like, yeah, they're all right, but what I really want is someone with green eyes trying to trick him.
Suddenly, lightning, thunder, and rain show up, crash through the walls, start smashing shit up, kidnap Green Eyes, and take it back to his lair. So they show up there, and this is where the film really starts getting crazy. Whole film for me feels like a 90s, early noughties video game. They're going down in levels, and every sort of level looks a bit different. Street level, where they're above. You have like the water level, because they get in through the sewers into like this underground swimming place, and there's all these skeletons tied up, and they're swimming through there. Then there's that level where it's sort of like an empty warehouse with different sized crates, which is in every single video game. You keep getting past bigger villains until you reach the big boss.
And the ultimate element of all video games, one can kill 300 people by themselves.
So we finally get to see Wang in an action scene, and we discover that he is the actual badass. Kurt Russell tries to take charge, and before he can even fire his gun, Wang's flown in like Bruce Lee and is just kicking the fuck out of like 12 guys. And I think that was supposed to be his big, hey everybody, I'm the lead of this film. But I don't know, it's still just Kurt Russell. Like he's still, even though he's the bigger badass, he's still the sidekick for me.
When he like started doing somersaults and shit, like literally through the air and like kicking people, I was like, oh, scrawny Asian guy knows kung fu. Do you know what I mean? We've seen it so many times before, but
I mean, there's moments where they just decide physics don't matter for this next shot, 100%. But that's fine with the type of filming. find a bunch of other people that have been tied up, you know, Kim Cattrall's characters, and they're all escaping. It's all good. Everything's great. They make it out of the building and escape. And then Kim Cattrall gets distracted by a giant orangutan thing.
Where she finds it is kind of like sewer levels, so I thought it was kind of like a giant rat kind of creature.
Turns out she also has green eyes. So when Lo Pan discovers this, he realizes, oh, I've got 2 chicks with green eyes for the price of 1, so I'm going to get married to both of you. How fucking sexy was Kim Cattrall in that geisha get up? Oh my god. In between him doing the ceremony and then sacrificing the girls, that window in between he's mortal, that's the window of opportunity to strike. That's a great device because it builds into the plot a reason for it all to go right down to the wire.
It's like Imhotep from The Mummy. Like there's only a little tiny bit where they read the book.
So we get to the big final showdown. The wedding's going on down below. All the little minions are, obviously showed up for it. So Kurt Russell and the lads stop off at a bar where the tour guide knocks together a magical performance enhancer in the form of this weird cocktail, which seems just to get them really high and happy and chilled out as they're going down in the elevator.
Feel pretty good. And I'm not scared at all. I just feel kind of invincible.
Me too. I got a very positive attitude about this.
Good, me too.
Yeah.
They should have just fucking banged loads of coke. They would have been mad. The actual showdown is madness, isn't it? It kind of, do you know what it reminds me of? I'd say my favourite James Bond film, You Only Live Twice. You know, the crazy massive battle in the end in the big hangar, and then like people are flying from like left to right, bombs are going off. It's exactly like that. You got people doing flips. You got tour guide using his magic against Wolpan.
That was the visual highlight of the whole film. Yeah. The tour guide has his beam of light, Lo Pan has another, and then when the 2 beam of lights meet, you see the silhouette of these 2 warriors clashing in slow motion, and it's such an inventive, brilliant bit of directing in a battle of force behind each other. Yeah. Clashing with each other, but to demonstrate it in that way was just such an interesting way to do that in that moment. So Lo Pan's trying to escape. He's about to sacrifice one of the girls. Kurt Russell pulls out this badass little trick with the knife.
Goodbye, Mr. Burton.
It's important to say the whole film he's been going on about how important reflexes are.
Like I told my last wife, I says, honey, I never drive faster than I can see. Besides that, it's all in the reflexes.
Because it was getting a bit annoying, the amount of times he brought up, been on the radio, like, and the reflexes are all, and never lie, and then, like, just hangs up. And it's like, why do you keep saying this? I know that you're arrogant, but no one wants to know about your reflexes unless you're, like, a goalkeeper or something. But yeah, it pays off. Good, great death scene, actually.
An even better death scene is when Thunder shows up a second later. Then he sees behind him that his master is dead and decides to blow up like a balloon and pop.
I was expecting like another little showdown between Thunder, another little fight, but I quite like this effect as well. It was good practical effect.
Very Paul Verhoeven.
Yes.
Reminds me a lot of when Arnold Schwarzenegger at the end of Total Recall. Again, it's like they could have had a fight scene, but it'd just be another fight scene. Why not have him blow up like a balloon and explode and pop? Like, I've never seen that before in a live action film. So Lightning has a Buddha statue dropped on him by tour guide, and they all escape in Kurt Russell's truck.
Sorry.
Don't you know how to drive this thing?
Relax.
Like Rodney Dangerfield says at the end of the film, we're all getting laid. Margot hitches up with that Asian dude. Wang is with his beautiful fiancée. Kurt Russell was getting off with Kim Cattrall. Kind of have a nice little, hey, maybe if you build a bed in the back of your truck, I'll come with you. And he's like, oh, maybe I'll settle down finally. I like the moment where someone asks, aren't you even going to kiss her goodbye? And he's just like, no. And she's a bit like, oh, she's loving it. And he drives off out of town and goes back on his CB radio chatting absolute bollocks and just basically just talking himself up about how great he is. Don't fuck with me, I'm I'm Kurt Russell.
It was really like, it's funny because it was like really full circle to when we was first introduced to Kurt Russell, Jack Burton chatting shit, to doing all of that stuff and then seemingly like, instead of being like traumatized or like in a loony bin about seeing all this mad shit, like people exploding like balloons, people shooting lightning out of their hands, he just seemingly has been like just another day at the office. He just jumps back in his.
He just seemed like he'd learnt nothing either. Like he was just like the exact same dude.
Well, until tomorrow, and just drives off into the sunset. So
you get Hand appear in his truck at the end.
Yes.
Sort of reminded me for a second of the Twilight Zone when that creature's climbing along the plane wing. And I think it was a weird rat boy orangutan monster that we don't quite know what is. It's a classic sort of like, it's not over, hey, maybe there'll be a sequel sort of ending. And it's such a shame this film did fuck all at the box office, because I would have loved a sequel either where he goes to maybe a Chinatown in the next city, and we can have like 5 films where he just always ends up in trouble in a Chinatown in a different area, or maybe next time he goes to Little India and gets caught up in like some bizarre fantasy mixing up Indian folklore or whatever. Like there's endless. I just wanted to see this character in this universe explored more, but John Carpenter was great at creating a universe that you would want to see more of. You know, we've seen 1 or 2 sequels to The Thing and it didn't really work that well, but The Thing has so much fan fiction. You can't help but imagine sequels to The Thing, or what would happen if The Thing got out, or other versions of The Thing. Like, you just can't help as a fan. And you don't do that with other films necessarily.
I got some bad news. The Rock wants to make a film out of it, and John Carpenter hasn't flat out said no to it. So it's being looked at, Declan. But unfortunately, Dwayne Johnson is attached.
Yeah, you prefix that perfectly, because I'm a fan of The Rock. I hate his fucking films. His films feel like, you know, when you're watching a movie and there's a character who's a big movie star in the movie, and you see the fake trailers for his fake movies that don't really exist in real life. It feels like those. They just never feel like they're real films you're watching.
I do want to see it, but only on the agreement that John Carpenter is involved in some capacity.
Do you recommend Big Trouble in Little China?
I love doing episodes of the show on films that I've never seen before. From a first time viewing, I would really recommend it. I mean, it's got what you want. It's got Kurt Russell. It's in the 80s. It's got John Carpenter. It's got really great action scenes. And it really does tie in good fantasy elements as well. So I thought it was a really, really solid film.